robbery. To modern audiences, it sums up an era of the craze, safe-cracking, or the great train robbery. Today, your average bank robber has to contend with dyed banknotes, CCTV everywhere, and the widespread use of credit cards. But until these advances were made, enormous amounts of money were being transported around the country, and it was common to pay for most things in cash. The criminal milieu took note of this situation. But the situation was made worse by the war. Enormous numbers of men had been demobilized and were looking for work. Guns were everywhere, and men certainly knew how to use them. James is going to talk to you about this case and another one that was linked from 3 years earlier.
It was January 1949 on a Friday afternoon at a Lloyds Bank branch on the Wells Road in Knowle. It was staffed by senior cashier 50-year-old George Black and 17-year-old assistant cashier Donald Twitt. It was a busy day, with customers coming and going at regular intervals, and around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, no one really noticed a smartly dressed man wearing glasses in his 20s enter the bank. He did not seem to be too concerned about being served by the cashier, instead standing to one side, trying not to be noticed. He was asked a couple of times by a member of staff if he was waiting to be served, but he politely said that he was waiting for somebody, at one point saying it was a bookmaker by the name of Murray. He did leave the bank for a minute or two before returning. Customers continued to come and go as usual for a busy afternoon. At 3 o'clock, John Rowe, who was a trainer at the nearby Greyhound Racing Stadium, entered the bank and joined the queue. He noticed the man standing to one side, who obviously was not an employee. Somehow he felt that there was something out of place, and he had an uneasy feeling about the man. Rowe quietly left the bank and telephoned the police from a phone box a short distance away, telling them of his suspicions. He walked back towards the bank around 3:10, intending to conclude his business, when he saw the stranger hurriedly leaving. He remarked in passing, "You're in a bit of a hurry, aren't you?" There was a swift reply that he had just collected a debt. "Hang on a minute," Rowe shouted. The reply this time was a swift punch in the face. The assailant raced over to his car, jumped in and started the engine. Rowe, although stunned by the blow, was having nothing of this and ran to the car and grabbed the door handle just as the car started to pull away from the curb, with Rowe hanging onto the open door. He released his grip, having been dragged several yards along the road. The car sped off, still with its door open. Although stunned and dazed, Rowe had the presence of mind to take the registration number of the Austin 16 car. It was JHY 812. But what of events back at the bank that had precipitated the rapid exit of the man in the car? There was utter turmoil. A serious incident had obviously occurred. The police were swiftly at the scene, where they discovered Twitt locked in a rear office, and the body of George Black, who had been shot point blank in the chest with what turned out to be a .32 caliber handgun. The car was quickly traced. It belonged to Frank Chappell, who had reported it stolen that morning. He had parked it outside his place of work on the corner of Temple Way and Victoria Street in the centre of the city. Mid-morning he noticed that there was another car parked where his had been, and immediately reported it missing at 11:15. Around lunchtime, a colleague of Chappell's thought he saw the missing car driving past the building, but could not clearly see the number plate. Nonetheless, he reported the possible sighting to the police. The car was seen twice again during the course of the day. The first was in Bedminster around lunchtime. The witness mentioned that the driver seemed to be having some difficulty driving the vehicle, as if through inexperience, and thought he saw a woman in the passenger seat. The second sighting was outside a shop in Knowle, close to the bank, at around 2 o'clock. The car later turned up in the afternoon abandoned in Totterdown. There was no trace of the driver. Meanwhile, Back in Knowle, the police carried out a complete search of the premises. At first it was thought that around £900 had gone missing, but when bank officials did a hasty audit, they discovered that the amount was £1,400, about $58,000 in today's money. The bank put up a reward of £1,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for the theft and the murder of the bank employee. A description of the assailant was quickly put together and circulated. This was based on statements from Twitt and Rowe, who thankfully was not too much the worse for wear after his ordeal. The suspect was a slim build with a round face, in his mid-20s, about 5 foot 6 inches tall, wearing a dark overcoat, flannel trousers, trilby hat and glasses. He was also holding a briefcase. The police did point out that the glasses may have been a disguise. 2 women came forward who had heard the shots fired and saw the suspect hastily leaving the bank and looking pale and shaken, and then getting into the car. They also saw what befell Rowe. Several customers who had been waiting to be served stated that they saw the man writing on a piece of paper. During their search, the police discovered a note on the floor, which read, "See you Monday at 2. Missed you today, Joe." A handwriting expert from London was called upon to help and agreed to try and build a profile of the writer. With the proviso that the author of the note was probably under stress, the opinion came back that he was a person with a grudge against life, capable of bursts of violence which were disassociated from his normal personality. The comments continued that he would show extreme irritation towards the object or objects of his resentment by continued pinpricks against what was annoying him until he had a burst of violence, after which he would calm down. He would be difficult to live with, was jealous, suspicious, cruel, and sneering. He had a poor mentality, no logic, no conservative thinking, and would be a bad worker, who exhibited a mixture of boastfulness and suspicious reserve. All this from a short note. Impressive. The police were taking this case extremely seriously. Over the following weeks, they interviewed over 200 customers who had visited the bank that day. They were all fingerprinted to compare with those found in the stolen car. There were no matches. 10,000 leaflets were distributed with the killer's description and a copy of the note. Extensive inquiries were made nationwide and even on the continent. Countless leads were meticulously followed up. An Irish bank robber who bore a resemblance to the suspect was interviewed by the Garda, but was released. Gang hideouts in London were raided, ports and railway stations monitored, and taxi drivers interviewed. In Bristol, one driver did recall taking a particular couple to a bed and breakfast, where the man bore a likeness to the suspect. It proved to be a false lead. A lorry driver on his way to Wrexham came forward saying that he had given a lift to a man matching the description. The police there confirmed that there had been some sightings of such a man, but the trail went cold. Similar sightings were reported in towns and cities throughout the country, but still the police were no further forward tracking down their quarry. In February, an anonymous letter was sent to the Bristol Evening Post. The contents being what they were, the editor immediately contacted the murder investigation. It was written in pencil on light blue paper. It contains some very specific details about the woman spotted in the stolen car and the man in question, and how he lived his life, including the fact that he always had a gun nearby. It was signed X29. There was another rather chilling piece of information in the note. It mentioned the murder of Odeon cinema manager Robert Jackson in Broadmead 3 years earlier, a case we coincidentally covered in episode 29. The connection being the Knowle bank murderer. The contents of the note were followed up, but again, the trail went cold. A Devon shopkeeper reported that a man had written him a cheque and that the handwriting looked similar to the note found in the bank. After analysis by a handwriting expert, it was found that there was no similarity. An English bank robber who had committed a similar crime in Germany was interviewed. He was not the wanted man. In September, the manager of the Midland Bank branch in Penrith was shot and killed during an armed robbery. The killer escaped in a taxi, having previously killed the driver before carrying out the attack on the bank. The killer's name was Charles Kennedy, who shortly after committed suicide as the police net closed in around him. His photograph was shown to Twitt and Rowe, but they were unable to identify him as the man who had killed the Knowle bank manager. Despite all the exhaustive efforts by the police, the case remains unsolved. Over the months that followed, banknotes from the robbery randomly turned up across the country. One of the strange aspects of this case is the behaviour of the perpetrator, which had been odd to say the least. He had stolen a car in broad daylight in one of the busiest areas of the city, driven it around openly for several hours, knowing that it would have been reported stolen, even taking a companion with him on one of the journeys. The car had been parked openly in a number of locations. No attempt before the job to hide the getaway vehicle comes over as somewhat reckless. As to the note that was left at the bank, a diversionary ploy or a genuine error? Why hang around in plain view before committing two major crimes, thus inviting unwanted scrutiny? Did an accomplice not turn up? What about the letter that was sent to the local paper by someone who clearly had detailed knowledge of the killer and his lady friend? And the suggestion that the wanted man had some sort of connection or knowledge about a murder committed a few years earlier. Was it sent to taunt the police or gloat as to how good they were in evading arrest? A jigsaw puzzle where the pieces will never fit. The crime remains unresolved and unsolved to this day. So, John, a fascinating story. I'm sure that you have some comments on it.
Provided that the note is genuine, let us examine the evidence of the handwriting expert in a bit more detail. It stated that the robber had no logic and exhibited a mixture of boastfulness. This would explain the reason the car was being driven around Bristol after it was stolen. Also, why mention the robbery/murder at the Odeon cinema of the manager Robert Jackson? We forget that there is now universal use of mobile telephones. In 1949, you were reliant on telegrams as you had to rely on the post office for a fixed line. Given the parlous state of the British economy, you could be waiting a long time. The alternative was to arrange for the time or date for phone calls from two phone boxes. Most victims actually know their killers, who quite often go to the police and admit their guilt. An extraordinary thing to do, as there was no remission for helping police with their inquiries. But what happens when you have two strangers? The police cannot build a profile of the victim as evidence because the crime happened on a random basis. Unless there is a pattern of behaviour of the killer, where do you start? In a small community, you can build up a picture of local behaviour. Impossible in a place the size of Bristol. You would have to interview not just the locals, but appeal to anyone who was visiting on the day. Would the guilty join the innocent? It reminds one of C.K. Chesterton's quotation of "Where do you hide a leaf? In a tree." Let us return to the greyhound trainer, John Rowe. Greyhound racing after the war was incredibly popular. He may have recognised the robber from the greyhound tracks. The murderer's car was abandoned in Totterdown, and he could easily catch a train from Tenfold Meads station to anywhere in the country. You could be anyone on that train.